We can't let you go without asking you about this perennial talk of reunion. First, are you still in touch with the old band members from Pink Floyd?
No, I haven't spoken to them for some time.
Does that suggest that talk of a reunion is at best premature, if not outlandish?
I didn't know there was any talk of a reunion.
Oh yes, all Pink
really?
All Pink Floyd fans want you guys to get together again. Think it might happen?
No, it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen?
No, there would only be one reason for it happening again, and that would be if we were all skint, and we're not.
That's a British phrase. What do you mean by skint?
Skint, broke, stony.
Oh. Busted, okay. We understand.
You know, when old bands get together again, there's normally one central motivating factor, and that is that they need the money, you know. People grow as they get older, and they change and they move in different directions. And the other guys in the band and myself have moved off in separate directions, and I doubt very much if our paths will converge in the future.
We were doing light shows just in a little church hall, in All Saints Church Hall in Powys Gardens in Notting Hill Gate. In fact, that's where we started to gain some kind of popularity in London. We started doing these. We would play there once a week, and it snowballed incredibly quickly. That was using liquid slides and stuff, which nobody was doing at all. But it snowballed very quickly. There were sort of 20 people there the first week, and 150 the second week, and the third week you couldn't get anywhere near the place. People had heard there was this band of lunatics doing all these weird things.
We had a very sort of, what it would now be considered ridiculously crude, but a very effective system generally using these colour slide things that people would put these liquid slides into carousel-type projectors, and then by heating them and using different sorts of inks and oils, make them bubble, spin, and do all sorts of things. It was actually a very effective device, but very simple, and certainly usable in a club situation.
The light techniques they're using now are the result of 5 years' research by an architect, Mike Leonard, at work here on his new light projector. The work goes on in a house in Highgate in London.
The most important start point for the light show was Mike Leonard and the Hornsey College of Art. That was a sort of idea that the music could be improvised and the lighting could be improvised to go with it.
I'd just been playing around with making light machines, and I'd started a first embryonic sort of light machine, which was really discs with coloured patterns pushed through optical devices, which gave you quite a wide range of images.
Another experiment aims at a more controlled relation between sound and image. Providing the music, a group which features a range of unusual sound effects, the Pink Floyd.
Floyd we'd managed to do that great thing, which is the perfect thing a manager can do, which is attach a group to a movement. And so somehow or another we'd managed to classically attach the Pink Floyd to the underground movement, as it then became known, the sort of psychedelic movement. So in a sense, people were buying their records because they had a light show. I mean, they weren't buying their records because they were such great records. Well, they were really, but they were listening to them or checking them out because of the light show, because they were trendy, because people had bells around their necks, because of smoking dope, because of incense, because of all those sorts of things. And so they're associated with a movement, so that if you wanted to be seen to be being underground and hip and groovy, well then you bought a Pink Floyd record.
So we were very experimental. By the time we got to UFO Club, we were playing whatever we felt like. And it seemed to me we actually played quite a lot of rubbish.
What we were doing was different, but my God, it was bad. I mean, our early playing was unbelievably amateur, and, there was an awful lot of Bo Diddley in there. In fact, if one could listen to a tape of it now, it was very, very ordinary musically. It's just that we got away from the 3-minute format, which almost everybody was still doing. There were no kind of extended solos in pop music. He was a very interesting man. He was a visionary, he was an extraordinary musician. He started Pink Floyd. If he hadn't been there, nothing would have happened. He was the key that unlocked the door. The icy waters underground.
I remember when Syd joined the band, he had all these incredible ideas, lyrically and musically. Very strange, and very childish in a way, some of his stuff. I mean, it's kind of fairy tales and all this stuff, but totally unique. I'd never heard anything like it, and it was fabulous.
He brought the ability to play the guitar, which was quite unusual at that time. I suppose also he brought the ability to perform, and eventually, I mean, obviously not immediately, but eventually he brought songwriting.
Syd had started writing songs, I think even before he came up to London, and we started the group. In fact, there was a kind of a group in existence before he came up to college, because he was a year younger than me, and he kind of joined an already existing set of people. And he certainly, from those very early days, was writing songs. Lucy Leave, I remember, was one of them. He wrote quite a number. Our set would be, in those days, would be, I should think, maybe 25% Syd's songs. Actually I did write the odd song then, in those days. They were awful, they were really terrible songs. And the rest of it was rhythm and blues, sort of anything from John Lee Hooker to Bo Diddley. But not much, we didn't get a lot poppier than Bo Diddley. Rufus Thomas. I don't think we ever did any Chuck Berry songs, I don't know why not. We probably couldn't play them. They were too difficult for us.
Emily tries but misunderstands. She's often inclined to borrow somebody's dreams till tomorrow. There is no other day.
Doing your first album, putting down your music onto tape, and knowing that the Beatles are next door doing Sgt. Pepper. I was a bit of a snob before then. I was a real jazzo, and I didn't really believe that pop music meant anything at all. When I heard Sgt. Pepper, it changed my attitude to what people like us could do.
Soon after dark, Emily cries, gazing through trees in sorrow, hardly a sound till tomorrow. There is no other day. Let's try it another way. You'll lose your mind and play.
Well, Norman Smith did the first few albums. He'd and taught us a lot about what was going on. He basically had been the engineer on the Beatles, and George Martin had been the producer, and he wanted to do a George Martin, basically. So he was looking at people from the point of view of discovering a new Beatles and becoming a really world name like George Martin and get percentage points off groups. And he looked at us, and he did us and the Pretty Things when they were doing their SF Sorrow and their sort of quite good concept album thing. And he taught us a lot of stuff, but he didn't want us to get wilder and wackier. He wanted things to be, he wanted things to be more regular and single. He wanted us to do lots of hit singles and be like the Beatles, I think.
Well, if I first may turn to Roger, I want to ask one fundamental question, of which our televiewers may not be quite aware the significance of it, because they didn't hear all of it. Why has it all got to be so terribly loud? For me, frankly, it's too loud. I just can't bear it. I happen to have grown up in the string quartet, which is a bit softer. So why has it got to be so loud, so amplified?
Well, I don't guess it has to be, but I mean, that's the way we like it. And we didn't grow up with a string quartet, and I guess that could be one of the reasons why it is loud. And it doesn't sound terribly loud to us.
Yes, actually, not everybody who hasn't grown up in a string quartet turns into a loud pop group, so your reason is not altogether convincing. But I accept that you like it. What I'm saying is that if one gets immune to this kind of sound, one may find it difficult to appreciate softer types of sound. Syd, yes? No?
I don't think that's so.
No.
I mean, everybody listens. We don't need it very loud to be able to hear it, and with some of it is very quiet, in fact.
Right.
Personally, I like quiet music just as much as loud music. We play in large halls and things where obviously volume is necessary, and when people dance, they like volume, comes in on its own, but...
There's no shock treatment intended?
No, certainly not. Some people think that we deliberately try and shock the audience and make them, by the volume and keep them quiet sort of thing, but this isn't so.
Well, there it is. I think you can pass your verdict as well as I can. My verdict is that it is a little bit of a regression to childhood. But after all, why not?
I went to see them at the Royal College of Art. It must have been in October or November. And at that College of Art run, I was talking to Nick, and he said, be prepared. You might easily be getting an invitation soon. And, I mean, you could see quite easily how horribly wrong it was all going for everyone. And they weren't enjoying themselves very much.
This is a sort of measure of his brilliance, really, because he was gone, he was really gone. And we went to this rehearsal hall and he said, I've written a new song. And we all went, great, fantastic. We'll learn it then. And he went, it goes like this, and he played this quite sort of fairly complicated rhythmic thing over some very simple chord changes. And then he said, and then the chorus goes, have you got it yet? Have you got, you see, like that. And so we went, oh yeah, right, okay, well, how does it go? And he played it again. And so we said, okay, we'll try it now. And we started playing it. And he played it differently, see. And then we get to the chorus. And he went on doing this, and it was at least 20 minutes before we suddenly started to twig that no, we hadn't got it, and there was no way we were going to get it, because every time he played it, he changed it.
I saw him writing Vegetable Man. He wrote it in our sitting room. He just sat there because he had to have a song for the session, and he just sat there and wrote. And it was just a description of himself and of where he was and what he was doing, you know. Jug Band Blues, and perhaps a bit earlier, you see, it's a bit more poetic. Vegetable Man and Scream Your Last Scream were the later songs, and they're becoming more and more sort of open sores and more naked.
His head did no thinking, his arms didn't move, except when the wind cut up rough and mice ran around on the ground.
I don't think they knew where they were going at all. When I joined, I think it seemed to be like we could maybe, how should I put it, maybe milk a bit more out of a dying thing. And that's just what we've been doing ever since, according to some.
He stood in a field where barley grows.
My guitar style and Syd's guitar style were not even close, so it was very difficult to know exactly what to do. It took a while for me to settle in.
Strange time with both Syd and I turning up together to rehearsals and going out and doing shows with 5 of us, where I would be learning and playing Syd's parts and singing Syd's songs, while Syd would be sort of standing there and sometimes singing a little bit and sometimes playing a little bit, and very odd.
And now meet Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. Roger, your kind of music doesn't usually find its way into the charts these days. Do you find there's still a demand for it?
Recording-wise, there's quite a big demand for albums.
Yes.
There isn't a demand for singles. It's not that kind of market. Really.
Right.
Back in the past, in the very early days, we tried to have hit singles. There was one called Apples and Oranges.
Down by the riverside, feeding ducks in the afternoon time. Apples and oranges.
Anyway, there were a number of attempts, and it became quite clear that we just were no bloody good at it.
The direction started taking place quite quickly after I joined. There was a direction that seemed to start coming forward, but I don't think that started till after Syd had gone. I don't think it was possible to really think of much of moving forwards while Syd was still there.
I think Gilmour was, in a way, probably a failed experiment, and quite an interesting one. You could say the significant thing was that we didn't do it again.
if you listen to the albums in the early 70s, there was a lot of let's just play D minor and wander about over the top of it. And then I know we could suddenly start playing very loud, still over D minor, no chord changes. And I'm thinking specifically of Careful with That Axe Usually. So it was the least subtle possible music that you could imagine, because it involved absolutely nothing. It involved no chord changes. All it involved was, it was still rock and roll by my definition, because it involved a sense of worry about sharp things, Careful with That Axe Usually. So the title was the whole song really, and there was a scream in the middle of it, and it all got loud, and then it all got quiet again. So there were, if you like, new ways of writing pieces developed out of the fact that none of us could write songs by any normal, accepted method. But we had to start trying.
I always think the musical direction of the band might be likened to four drunks wrestling for control of a car wheel.
I mean, I'm a different person. Roger writes what he writes, and I just write whatever I can manage. It's quite enough of a struggle getting any lyrics without worrying about whether I'm being positive or not positive, or more positive or less positive.
Over the years, learned to recognise a feeling that is, here comes a song, and when that happens I go pick up a guitar or go to the piano and wait for it to emerge. It's a very passive thing. If my songs mean stuff to people, it's because the conscious bit of me, interferes as little as possible with the emergence of the song from the subconscious and therefore more real feelings.
It was a period when we were very involved with a man called Ron Geeson.
He's a Scottish lunatic.
Exactly. And he did the choral parts for Atom Heart Mother for us. But he also, I think, taught all of us quite a lot about tape recorders and how to use them and the tricks you could do with them. And I think that piece reflected a lot of Roger's interest at the time in using sort of human sounds, but then altering them drastically by tape speed or whatever.
It was already a complete piece before Ron came on the scene, and we decided to get him to do some orchestration.
They had lots of little, or not so many actually, maybe 5 or 6 little sections that they had recorded at EMI Abbey Road of what I call a backing track, and they had then stuck these together. The speeds were all wrong. Like when you're moving through a piece, you know when it should speed up, you know when it should slow down. In fact, the reverse happened with some of the sections, because when they stuck the sections together, they didn't actually really work. So my job, the job part of it, not the art part of it, the job part, was to craft something sensible on top of this rather cobbled collage or montage and make it look like it was working. The art bit was getting a couple of melodies that really worked. And I believe that the opening theme melody really works and the cello melody really works. And they're entirely out of my head.
At that time, EMI had just moved on to 8-track recorders with 2-inch tape. And no one had actually cut the tape at that point. It was considered that maybe there would be problems if it was edited. Consequently, Roger and I had to do the backing tracks in one pass. It was a 23-minute piece, something like that. We probably took about the third take where we actually got all the way through it because it was so difficult for us to remember where the hell we were in the piece. So from then on, the thing in some ways went downhill.
When we'd finished all the recording sessions at Abbey Road, I said to Steve O'Rourke, the manager, I said, that was a good rehearsal. Can we do it again, please? For real. Of course, that was never to be because of the energy levels and the money constraints and the whole bit, and EMI wanting to get the stuff out. So reality prevailed, which is a state of art. It always has been.
I think the whole thing was a bit of a mishmash myself.
If Atom Heart Mother in itself was a more structured piece, or if there was some way of pulling it out, I'd still love to perform something like that again, just the vocal section. I'm sort of less fond of the brass parts for it.
I wouldn't dream of performing anything that embarrassed me. If somebody said to me now, right, you know, here's £1 million, go out and play Atom Heart Mother, I'd say, you must be joking.
The group was mostly receptive to my ideas. There were murmurings and frowns and puzzlement at times, but it's not bad. It's not a bad little number, but it was, again, it was all that could be done with all the material and confinements. Various.
Look back on it now, on the Atom Heart Mother period, and I can see where the progression is going from Source of Full of Secrets through Atom Heart Mother to, say, Echoes on Meddle. And there is a sort of progression that you can follow what we were trying to get at, but I would not say that Atom Heart Mother was at all a successful one, really. It's not something that I have any great fond memories of.
the Meddle album, to me, is the point where it all started falling into place. The Echoes piece itself, sort of 25 minutes long, going through all sorts of different moments, all of which are really good. So, yeah, that was leading the way towards the Dark Side of the Moon.
Pinging at the beginning was Rick, and we had put a microphone onto a grand piano and run it through a Leslie speaker, which is what you usually use for the Hammond organ. And every time, as Rick was tinkling away on the piano, every time you got to one particular note, it would pick up a resonance through the Leslie speaker. And so he just started making up that intro piece, which we then recorded. And we left it at that. We then carried on and we did loads and loads of other demos for that album, for the Meddle album. And that was the first time we started moving out of Abbey Road Studios, in fact, because they had not got 16-track tape recorders, whereas George Martin had built his Air Studios and we got 16-track tape machines in there. So I think we moved up there to make most of that album. But we did a lot of the demo stuff for it at Abbey Road. And the very beginning of that Echoes track was from the demo, and when we tried to reproduce it, we couldn't ever get it to sound quite the same again. So we actually had to use the demo piece up to the first chord change, I think, and we then edited onto another piano through another Leslie that we recorded somewhere else.
Overhead the albatross hangs motionless upon the air, and deep beneath the rolling waves in labyrinths of coral caves, an echo of a distant time comes willowing across the sand, and everything is lovely.
Felt at the time that we'd had enough of concert films, so maybe the main idea of the film was to do a sort of anti-Woodstock film where there would be nobody present, and the music and the silence and the empty amphitheatre would mean as much, if not more, than a million crowd.
Roger came up with the thing. I'd been playing with the delay, a tape delay on my guitar. Oh, for years I'd been playing with it, but just before then I'd been doing some specific rhythmic things with it. And he decided to try and do the same type of thing as I was doing on a guitar, on the bass. And he came up with that basic sort of riff, which was the same as one I'd done previously on a guitar. And we went into a studio called Morgan Studios. In fact, we recorded that at Morgan Studios. And we decided that we were both going to play it. Myself and Roger were going to double track it at the same time live with two basses. So we got the spare bass out of its box, and the strings were completely dead. They were horrible on it. So we sent one of our roadies off to rush out to buy a new set of bass strings. It became a very funny story because he didn't come back for like 5 hours. And we were sitting there with the clock running up and the money disappearing down the drain. And we actually put the track down without him. And you can actually hear it. The first bass that comes in, I'm playing, you hear this dong sound. And when the second one comes in, it's also because it's got these horrible dead old strings on. It's still there on the record.
cœur de la Nouvelle-Guinée, une des plus grandes îles du monde. Les Australiens ont découvert ces montagnes en 1954. Aucune route n'y mène. Elles sont inaccessibles.
It's an interesting area, but it's possibly something we're more likely to do as individuals than as the band, because it tends to take up an album, and that sort of valuable time that's perhaps better spent, because of the time taken on an actual Pink Floyd album that's not directed by or motivated by any other outside force. But it's a very good discipline, I think, in terms of making records, because you're suddenly called upon to do a very different sort of job, and you're not given a free hand at all. You're asked to do music to very specific moods and very specific lengths. So I think it's a good discipline, but we're not interdisciplinary.
There were things on Obscured by Clouds and Meddle where Roger was really starting to try and write stuff that did mean something and was relevant to people and situations. I was the guy who had to sing most of this stuff, I was the singer previous to that, and on most of Dark Side of the Moon I'm the singer. And it's a vast improvement. It's much nicer to be able to sing about something that you agree with and you believe in than to sing some of the other stuff that we'd done earlier, which was, some of it was embarrassing to sing, to be frank, and so I was in absolute full agreement with doing it. It was definitely progress, definitely a move forward in my mind. I concentrated personally on trying to make sure that the music lived up to it, because Roger in his sort of moving forward in that way lyrically would sometimes forget that the music had to be good as well. And I think the music started taking second place to him. The more he got into that lyric thing, the music started, on some occasions, certainly not on all occasions, but on some occasions the music started taking second place, and I sort of considered it my responsibility, if you like, to make sure that all the other sides of it stood up just as well.
Dark Side was the first piece where we really, I think, planned it out from, the start to the finish.
We all were quite convinced that we were moving into a slightly different league, I suppose you could say.
It's very easy to see Dark Side as a turning point now, but at the time, it was just the next album we were working on.
Dark Side of the Moon was the discovery of a format. I like the idea of an album being about one specific thing and all the songs within it relating back to a central theme or idea.
It's a great record. It doesn't sound out of date even today. I mean, sound quality is great. It's good music. It's great lyrics, had a great cover, a great package. The whole thing, all of it, every part of it worked and fitted together.
The things that were occurring to me as being ideas, possible ideas for songs, I suddenly realised could be linked thematically to make a piece about being in rock and roll, really, and about the pressures involved and how they can divert you from maybe your true path. How easy it is to get pushed sideways into areas which are a waste of time. I had a shrewd suspicion. Yeah, in fact, I knew. I was absolutely certain. I don't know, I just had a feeling that there was something very complete about it that appealed to me. You know, an awful lot of albums that aren't based around a concept and that don't have a flow and dynamic built into them, you know, you get a couple of strong tracks, and then there's a weak track, and then and because there's no interconnection between them, there are holes, gaps in the thing. And Dark Side of the Moon, when we'd finished it, it felt to me as if there weren't any gaps, there weren't any holes. You know, as you put it on at the beginning of side one, you were compelled to leave it going and to turn it over and put on side two and listen to the whole thing.
I suppose the nicest thing about Dark Side is that I don't have a real favourite track. What I like is the way it interacts and moves together, and I think in a way that's the sort of best compliment I could pay it, because the tendency would be with most records to be able to say, well, I particularly like this track or that track, but Dark Side, there's quite often sort of nice link pieces or the reprise of an idea, which I'd like very much. I think there's more to be done with that in rock and roll generally.
Our sales and popularity moved in a quantum leap. I mean, we were actually doing really well before Dark Side of the Moon in terms of ticket sales. We could sell out pretty big places throughout the States and Europe, and the albums just never really got anywhere before then. And we really had not, I don't think anything we before then had sold more than about 250,000 records. And Dark Side of the Moon did rather more. And subsequently, of course, all the early records have sold far more than they ever sold in their first run. But number one, yes, it was a wonderful thing.
I think it's our best album. I love it lyrically, but I also love it just musically, and I love the flow of it. And I just think, I mean, I will listen to that album for pleasure. There's not many of the Floyd albums I can.
Everyone thinks that the best of our moments are the moments where, I do anyway, think that the best of our moments are when the best of Roger and his lyric and idea and driving force came together with some of my more melodic and emotional moments that sort of fall out of my guitar and things once in a while. Certainly the Wish You Were Here album on Shine On You Crazy Diamonds are sort of sublime moments for me anyway.
From as I say, I might have been just playing an A minor chord, boring old, and just moved my fingers to the wrong position. It could just be an accident, but it did seem to sort of have a sort of haunting, calling sound to it.
When something does that, you sort of repeat it over and over, trying to sort of see why it's attractive to you and where you should take it. And that set Roger off he loved it, and that's what sort of got the ball rolling, I suppose you could say.
When I'm singing, Shine On, Syd's right there all the time, obviously, because the song is just absolutely about him. It's a really good song, and it describes how I experienced his disintegration, and it describes as well the great desire I had then and still have now, and the passion I have to celebrate him and his talent and his humanity, and to express the love that I have for him.
Remember when you were young, you shone like the sun.
Played that in the control room of number 3 studio at Abbey Road, and it's just something I'd been strumming at home, and Roger immediately said, "What's that? What's that?" And we had to sort of immediately get on with that and work it up and write the rest of the music and stuff. Wish You're Here is must be fairly specifically about Syd, but it applies to so many other things. It has an emotional depth, and it's sort of fairly universal, I think. And I suppose you could say that we haven't done quite as many concerts as people like the Stones have or someone. So my performances of Wish You Were Here still number in sort of 300 or 400, I suppose. There's another thousands that some people might do. But it still resonates. It still has its meaning. It means that to me every time I sing it. It's a brilliant. It is a very, very good combination of music and words that seems to capture something.
That was widely reported over here because this pig was about 45 feet long, filled with helium, and it was suspended over the top of Battersea Power Station on a wire. And there was always a possibility that, you know, that something was going to break because nobody built an inflatable like that before. So we had a man standing by with a rifle to shoot the thing down should it escape, to puncture it so that the gas would escape and it would come down. I think he was having his lunch when the wire went. And by the time he got out of his car and, you know, loaded his rifle, it was gone. It was a dot in the sky. It just went whoosh and it was gone. And by that time, London Heathrow were receiving radio messages from incoming planes that there was this pig in the air lanes. And so, of course, all the messages at Heathrow are, as a matter of course, are monitored by wire services and news services in case anything happens. And so that got reported.
Well, I think one of the best things about working with Storm is that he knows us very well. And I think that probably gives us an awful lot of shorthand. He has a pretty good idea of what won't interest us and what will. I think probably, graphically, we're more radical than we are musically.
It's not as broad an album, I suppose you could say, in appeal as some of the other ones have, but I like it a lot.
I didn't really like a lot of the music on the album. I have to say I didn't fight very hard to put my stuff on, and I didn't have anything to put on. I mean, I played on it, and I think I played well, but I didn't contribute to the writing of it. But I think also Roger is kind of not letting me do that. This was the start of the whole ego thing, I think, in the band. Animals.
Well, the idea for the wall came from 10 years of touring the rock shows, I think. Particularly the last few years when in 75 and in 77 we were playing to very large audiences, some of whom were our old audience who'd come to hear what we wanted to play, but most of whom were only there for the beer in big stadiums, and consequently it became rather an alienating experience doing the shows. And I became very conscious of a wall between us and our audience, and so this record started out as being an expression of those feelings.
It was noisy, people were shouting, and he wanted them to listen to music, but you can't ask people to do that in a stadium of 50,000.
They'd shout for what they wanted or their favourite songs or whatever. And you could, I mean, inevitably, and quite rightly, Roger was pretty distressed at the fact that they weren't listening to the music.
And when he said he wanted to build a wall across the audience, I thought this is absolutely insane. But he was right, and I was wrong.
time I sort of bought it all. But since I've sort of, I have to say that my sort of reappraisal of it is that it's rather a whinge.
A small percentage of this is autobiographical, and all of it is rooted in my own experience. But this isn't my autobiography, although it's rooted within my experience. Like any writing, some of it's me, and an awful lot of it is what I've observed. If you're interested in writing songs or writing books or writing poems or writing anything, those are the things that you try and write down, because those are the things that are interesting, and those are the things that will touch other people, which is what writing's all about.
I don't fully agree with the concept of the wall. To me, it's more a catalogue of complaints, and I don't want to blame everything in my life on everyone else in my life, not myself. I think it's too complaining myself. I think there is some wonderful stuff on the album. I mean, I think there is some optimism and stuff inherent, because that's one of the wonderful things about music, is that you can have a rather doom-laden lyric on top of an uplifting piece of music, and it juxtaposes it, and it gives you a feeling of uplift about it. I think the film definitely got too black and bleak, but as I say, I don't fully concur with everything Roger says on that. I believe some parts of it are very good, but some parts were sort of a bit myopic to me.
Crazy toys in the attic, I am crazy.
No doubt, really, the wall represents the most elaborate, the most difficult to repeat, if you like, of the tours. Just because it was the most elaborate, we had so much staging going on and so many devices. And although there was less scope for creativity in the playing during those shows, it was still just as satisfying to get the show through as smoothly as possible, make everything interact properly and work in the right place, and so on. So there's enormous satisfaction there.
The wall shows got as tight as we could get. I mean, there was no room for improvisation and no room for anything, and it was, 100% concentration on just getting the cues and everything right and performing it right. So although I loved it as a show and it was great fun, it was musically it was not really good fun to play, because it was too difficult. I had a huge cue sheet which I was following. I was listening to cues and counting people in, and it was difficult. The only moment I could let go was playing Comfortably Numb up on top of that wall, where I did get a sort of extended solo and have a bit of fun. I was very, very involved in it. I mean, I worked my butt off for a year on that record. I co-wrote 3 of the songs. I wrote all the music for Comfortably Numb, all the music for Run Like Hell, and part of the music for Young Lust. and did an enormous amount of production and arrangement work on that album. And of course it is something that bugs me slightly, that people tend to think that it's a Roger Waters solo album, which it just certainly isn't. You know, it was a lot of hard work went into that by all of us. Richard had been doing less towards what we were doing together over a period of time. For some reason, I think he was not entirely happy with the type of things that we had between us agreed to do. And by the time it got to making the Wall album, he'd certainly more or less stopped. And it was inevitable that he would have to go. What do they say? Musical differences or mutual disagreements? He'd just had enough, I guess.
I made a decision then, well, I can't work with this guy anymore anyway. I don't want to. I don't like this band anymore the way it is. And I left.
The sound is quite often, it's not necessarily only to do with what the solo instruments are. It is to do with an overall sound. And Rick's contribution at that level is immeasurable. And you forget it until you hear it. And he's an extraordinary character anyway, because a lot of what he does is totally natural. I mean, if you ask him to if you explain what you want, he might have some difficulty with it. If you just leave him to do it, it just comes straight out.
The final cut, I suppose, ended up as being an expression of my concern that my generation, our generation, have betrayed the sacrifice of the dead from the Second World War, one of whom was my father. The post-war dream was the dream that was the war to end all wars, and that we were going to learn a whole load of stuff from it. And we had the first Labour government in England immediately, 1947, I think. A National Health Service was introduced, and there was a feeling that we were going to build a kinder world out of the rubble, if you like. And I don't think we have.
Take all your overgrown infants away somewhere and build them a home, a little place of their own.
It was torture to me. We really weren't getting on at all well. I felt that Roger was resurrecting tracks that we had not accepted for the Wall album. And I did say to him, they weren't good enough then, why are they good enough now? It got so difficult that Roger wanted me to not have a say in what was going on the production side of the album. So after a lot of arguing and umming and ahhing and soul-searching, I agreed to come off the production credits.
I think we'd all absolutely had enough of working with each other. The Wall had been an enormous sort of effort, and not only had gone on for a long time with films, movies, Book of the Film, Son of Wall and all the rest of it. By the time we got the final cut, that was another development of the Wall. I mean, that was meant to be the final Wall. And I think also that by then Roger was doing so much of the writing, so much of the work, that he was feeling that we weren't pulling our weight, and we were feeling frustrated that there was nothing to do. So I think it's a good example of the fault is fairly equally divided.
I think by then there was very much a feeling that we were really hardly a band anymore, that the sum was no longer greater than the parts, that we weren't achieving anything like our potential. But the thing became, I think it became a sort of an arena for all the problems of Roger feeling that really he wanted to either leave the band or run it his way. And the material became, it sort of drifted actually. I think it probably drifted away from one idea and then became a sort of new concept and a new story. And that happened halfway through, and instead of perhaps ditching it, which is perhaps what we should have done, or rethinking it, we didn't even really have the sort of mechanism set up anymore as a band to be able to sort of sit and talk rationally about it. It would have simply been another opportunity for a fight. I think at the time I thought this was I suppose I saw that album as the beginning of the end.
Inevitably in a band like Pink Floyd there's a lot of jealousy builds up and rancour and backbiting, and as I'm on record often saying, I think bands tend to stay together far too long because it's safe and comfortable and you have a guaranteed sale of concert tickets and records and things like that because the brand name is very powerful. But I stayed far too long.
It was a relief when he got out, and I had told him consistently that I would carry on without him if he went. There was a point when he started saying, well, he'd come and sit in the back of the control room every day, but that's before he actually officially left. He said, if you started up without me, I'll come anyway and f*** you up. So, well, he eventually decided to leave, and I think he was trying to... I think he was trying, in making that statement, he was trying to force us into saying that we'd pack it in and wouldn't do it anymore. But I told him before then and after him that was not my intention, and that I would get it together and do it again. And I started sort of planning at that time. I started planning at that moment that he left for what and how and when to do it.
Pink Floyd isn't officially knocked on the head. But why aren't we ever going to do anything again? It's not much fun anymore, I think. A few political problems within the organisation, which I'm not prepared to go into.
The problem with rock and roll is that it has a public face, but at the end of the day it's another business. So it's like most people expect people to behave appallingly in business and stab each other in the back and be generally rather horrid. Rock and roll is really rather similar, but it's sometimes superheated because of the money involved or the fame or whatever, and the business of who gets credit for what and all the rest of it.
I didn't want to get into a huge slanging match, and I didn't want to get into a court action or any of that stuff. I just wanted to get on with my life. I mean, I failed to see, as I still fail to see, what I did to make Roger upset. I mean, it was my life as well as his life. It was Nick's life as well as his life. We, both contributed in a very large scale to what Pink Floyd was, and trying to dissect the whole of Pink Floyd and analyse it and say who did what precisely in what proportion and who added the salt to the mixture. It's a pointless exercise. The fact is, it was my career, and I had no intention of stopping. So I still, like I say, I still fail to see what I did to him. I just wanted to carry on with what I did for a living, in the way I'd been doing it. And so he started all that legal shit, which I never... It was just a pain in the arse to be working hard, trying to make a record, writing recording when the phone would ring every 2 minutes and it would be the lawyers on with this detail or that detail, which was a very good incentive for moving to Los Angeles, where the office hours are not in sync with the English ones, so that we could get on with it with less interruptions. Many of the old team of people around me as I could to help, yeah, I was frightened. Yeah, I didn't know if I could do it. I mean, I don't think we announced it was a Pink Floyd album until about Christmas, because those first couple of months we were working away, and I didn't know if it was going to make it. And it was around the Christmas period we started having about enough stuff to start thinking that we could do it, and we then committed to it, and then it sort of all stepped up a gear, because I thought now it is a Pink Floyd project, and we will go for it on that basis. But I was quite tentative about it in the first 3 months.
We had a sensitive and mystical, magical kind of time making the record. We did it on this magnificent boat on the Thames River. A 100-foot-long houseboat.
It was actually very pleasant to get out of the sort of standard studio atmosphere. However luxurious a studio is, it still tends to be a little bit sort of dark and timeless and all the rest of it, whereas actually to be somewhere where you can look out the window and feel a bit less claustrophobic about it became an important factor.
Watching the geese fly down the river and the sunset on the Thames, and even during the winter, the snowfall on the grass and so on was so magical. It was such a beautiful, hidden away, removed place. And I think that the atmosphere of the place seeped into the record.
Anthony Moore, a friend of mine who wrote some of the stuff on the album, some of the lyrics, was working away at the boat on the studio, and whenever there was a nice day, I would disappear off to the airfield and have flying lessons, and this rather frustrated him, I think. He would, one day, while I was away flying, and he was in a bout of frustration and rage at me not being there, he obviously started writing a song about learning to fly. Damn good little tune, if you ask me. I've made a demo of the music for that. Quite a nice sounding demo. And Anthony came in one day and I was just playing this thing and he instantly loved it and instantly wanted to take a copy away with him and came back like the next day with the first draft of the lyrics for that. And it was one of those instant ones where he demanded that I let him have it and that he write the lyrics for it, because it obviously musically was a track that sparked him off instantly. And it's really what it's all about when things like that happen, when you write something that sparks someone else off in a major way to go and be creative with what you've done.
On the turning away from the pale and downtrodden, and the words they say which we won't understand, don't accept understood what's happening. It's just a case of other suffering. Oh, you'll find that you're joining in the turning away.
I think the most important thing to say from my point of view about the Momentary Lapse tour was I had a wonderful time. The thing that we got from that was to go out and work long and hard enough to actually develop something to the point where you could say it's right. All the touring we ever did through all the 70s and 80s, we never ever did enough. So the shows were always half developed. We could never put, with the exception of The Wall, where because it was to be filmed, we were able really to throw everything at it and do it properly. But we still never played it as well as we would have done if we'd done it for, let's say, at least 3 months.
It's just a much more relaxed attitude amongst us about how we go about doing the things we do, and decisions are not usually with vast arguments, and we tend to agree pretty much on what we're attempting to do.
I think the music is, there's perhaps slightly more a sense of fun on stage or within the band, and so the playing is just a little bit freer.
I don't think there was any clear idea of the future, except that everyone realized the band had started happening again. And that last tour had a wonderful feeling to it that we hadn't had for years, because I've done every Pink Floyd tour, and certainly for me, I had probably the best feeling of the band being together since the beginning, actually. So I knew it was going to happen again. There was no way that after the feeling that we had on that tour that Dave or Nick would say, not again.
Silence surrounding me. I can't seem to think straight. I'll sit in the corner. No one will bother me. I think I should speak now. Why won't you talk to me? But I can't seem to speak now. You never talk to me. My words won't come out right. What are you thinking? I feel like I'm drowning. What are you feeling?
I suppose really the first album that I was in charge of was the Momentary Lapse of Reason album, when I was sort of entering a really difficult personal phase, but didn't want to get into it, and didn't want that to get into the record particularly, I guess. I don't really know. Right now, I'm in a much better personal state than I was at that time. Very happy in my life, and not unhappy to sort of let it seep through into some of the music. You have to do what you feel is the right thing to do at any one given moment, and if you may not have the reasons for it firm up against the front of your mind, but these felt like the things that I wanted to put into the music, and some of them just come about accidentally, you know. And you start off with a little piece of music and something comes to mind, and you think, yeah, and you start exploring it, and it takes its own volition, and the only decision you really have to make is whether you are brave enough to actually leave it there like that.
The intention of this album was to try and recreate a band feeling. Both Dave and Nick, I speak for them I think, and myself, really liked the feeling we had on Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here.
And this album, I guess I'd say for the first time since maybe the Wish You Were Here album, is a more joint effort than any album we've done since then.
It was a moment when
when we did review really how other albums had been done and what we liked in past albums and what we'd like to do again and find. What I particularly wanted on this record was for it to be much more a played record and played by the band rather than bringing people in to augment it and help do it and so on. At least the sort of basic ideas are all designed and therefore playable by the principals.
The album since, say, Animals was more an album where Roger and I were taking command of it, and it was becoming more down to things that were written at home by people. The Wall even more so. The Momentary Lapse of Reason album was recorded again by... It wasn't a terribly cooperative event with everyone really putting their maximum in. And this album, I guess I'd say for the first time since maybe the Wish You Were Here album, is a more joint effort than any album we've done since then.
It sounds like the waves of the sea. I was thinking all about her, burning with rage and desire. We were spinning into darkness, and the earth was on fire. She could take it back. She might take it back.
We started off by going into Nick's studio, Britannia Row studio in London, January '93, with myself, Rick and Nick and Guy, the bass player from our last tour, and we just jammed away at anything for 2 weeks, just playing anything that we had in our heads or that we made up on the spot. And then we took all that over to Astoria and started listening to all the tapes and working stuff out. We found we had 65 pieces of music. You know, the actual process of sitting together in a room with several musicians and actually performing together from nothing is a very interesting, exciting sort of process. And rather than coming into the studio with pieces of music that I already had and pieces of music that Rick already had and stuff like that, and music from anywhere, I thought that it would be better for us to start off from scratch with nothing and just go in and start jamming. Whether or not we would keep all that stuff or whether we'd use any of it or what was not really particularly relevant, but just to start that process off. And in fact, we didn't use, several of the tracks are sort of my own songs that didn't even come from that period and have been written since or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but that process was a very, very good, if you like, communal process where we all contributed together, and that was what started the album off. It gave us our kickstart. So the start of the album came from a more joint effort than any album that we've made since Wish You Were Here. I suppose you could say that there's a theme throughout the album which involves communication, and pretty much all the songs are connected to the theme of communication in some way or another. You know, you make a record, and the record you do to suit yourself, but you hope that people will sit at home and listen to it in a certain environment which is personal, and they will devote their energy to listening to it in a way, and they will get out of it a lot of good out of it. They'll be moved by it, hopefully. When you take a show out, it's a slightly different proposition.
There's 50, 60,000 people out there in front of you. You can't do it the same way. You have to attempt to entertain in a slightly different way than you are with a record. So we do consider ourselves to be serious at the work we do and serious musicians in some sort of way. But on the road doing big concerts, I also think we have a responsibility to make it entertaining and fun.
The sum is still greater than the parts. That's what it boils down to. That there are things that can be achieved with a band that cannot be by the individual, or any individual, I think. If there's no aspiration, and if there's no interest or no enthusiasm, then the thing is dead anyway.
People grow as they get older, and they change and they move in different directions. And the other guys in the band and myself have moved off in separate directions, and I doubt very much if our paths will converge in the future.
So you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain? Can you tell a green field from a cold